Everyone, and welcome to Ask Hala, a live discussion where you can ask questions or ask about or contribute your ideas on a given topic. This is part of a series of webinars for English teachers in the Middle East and North Africa region. And please tell us your name and where you're joining from. Okay. So today we have our host, Hala, who I think is joining from Egypt, but has experience in a number of other locations. And we also have Noura in Bahrain. As you can see, I am in the lush forests of Tunisia. And we also have Asil with us, who is also in Egypt, maybe in Cairo, but I'm not sure. Okay. This is part of, if you have not registered for the event, please register if you would like to get an electronic certificate that you attended, okay? All the Ask Hala events can also be found on the British Council's MENA YouTube. If you go to the British Council's MENA YouTube and go to playlists, then you'll find one playlist for Ask Hala webinars, where you can watch recordings of all the previous webinars. And you can also see a playlist for the Teacher Networking Initiative there, okay, which might be of interest to you. If you teach learners who are refugees or are displaced from their usual or previous home, you might find the next British Council Teaching English course very useful. That starts on the 7th of June and it runs for 4 weeks. It's for teachers who have a level of English of B1 or above. And if you complete the whole course and all the activities in it with a pass mark of 70% or above, you will get a certificate for the course. You can register for that course up until the 27th of June. So if you're watching this as a recording and you didn't catch the beginning, it's not too late. You can still join in if it's before the 27th of June. So you can use the link in the chat, I think, to join this course. And you can also find this course and many other resources and ideas for teaching English on teachingenglish.org.uk. That's Teaching English, all one word, .org.uk. It's the British Council's site for teachers of English and teacher educators. Coming soon, Egypt British Council has a community of practice leader course. And this helps teacher educators to develop their skills in building communities of practice for teachers of English. I think the focus is particularly on teaching skills online, but I may be corrected by somebody who knows more about it there. So please do correct me if anybody wants to shout out. So thanks very much, and I'll hand over to Hala Ahmed, our host for today.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really pleased to be back to the Ask Hala webinar series. I'm looking very much forward to meeting lots of teachers from the Middle East and North Africa. I'm also pleased to be joined by my team and colleagues from different parts of the MENA region. Andrew, who lives in Tunisia, Noura, who lives in Bahrain, Asil and Amira, who lives with me in Egypt. My name is Hala Ahmed and I work for the British Council in Egypt. and I'm really happy and honored to be supporting teachers across the MENA region for 2 years now through the Ask Hala webinar series. Let's get started. Our today's session is about how to create inclusive classrooms, and we built this session and the rest of the webinar series around the needs that you expressed in a survey a couple of months ago. So we designed a survey, then you guys voted on the most interesting or the topics that you feel you need the most. And we started by building our Ask Hala webinar series number 3 around those topics that you chose. So what are we going to look at in this webinar? We're going to discuss what we mean by inclusion and why inclusion is important and why is it important for us as educators to create inclusive classrooms. And we're going to have time to self-reflect and self-assess our own teaching practices and see if our teaching practices are really inclusive. We will highlight barriers to inclusion and obstacles that prevent teachers or things that teachers need to take into account when they create inclusive classrooms and inclusive learning environment. And we'll finish by practical tips and strategies to make your teaching inclusive. Tell us in the Q&A box if you can hear me okay, if you can see me and the slides okay. So first of all, what is inclusion? On your left-hand side, you can see 4 diagrams, 4 shapes, right? And I want you now to match these 4 words to these 4 shapes. So shape 1, 2, 3, 4, which of them is exclusion? Which of them is segregation? Which is integration? And which is inclusion? 4 shapes, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 terms: exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion. And Andrew will help me out telling me about your responses in the Q&A box. Did we get any responses, Andrew?
Not yet. I was just putting the question in the chat as well in case it helps. So which is segregation, which is exclusion, which is integration?
Integration, and which is inclusion. And actually the picture on your right hand might help you get the answer.
So maybe they, just thinking about it, I suppose the words exclusion and inclusion are quite helpful, aren't they? They're like opposites.
Right.
Q&A box, sorry, thank you, Q&A box. Just checking there. Right, thank you very much. If you want me to mention your name, please let me know. So somebody whose name I can't see says that number 3 is the right. Number 3 is the inclusion, but then Dr. Varalakshmi Aswari Mariada says number 1 is exclusion. Number 2 is I have many answers coming in now, and I can hardly follow. Okay, so I think
it's okay. Let's reveal the answers and check. And I want you guys to look at the screen now and check if your answers are guessing is correct.
I think the doctor had it anyway. Yeah.
Right. So 1 is exclusion. Well done on that one, because the blue stars are isolated within a circle with all the rest of the colors outside the circle. So we're excluding a group. Number 2 is segregation, because we're isolating the blue stars and we're also isolating the colored stars. We have 2 isolated groups. They cannot communicate with each other. Is integration. We brought the colored stars, the stars that have differences, and we put them within a bigger group, but they are still isolated within the wider group. So the group of the different colored stars became a part of a bigger group, but they are still isolated. Number 4 is the one we'd like to look at in today's webinar, which is inclusion. So the group is mixed. There is no isolation. There are no boundaries. It's a mixed, it's one community, one unit. The blue stars are merged with the colored stars. So this is a merged system. So remember this word very well. Merging, merged. So we've got exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion, representing 4 different educational systems, but we're hoping we promote today the value of inclusive educational systems, as you can see from the picture on your right hand. So now, what is inclusion? Inclusion is a belief, it's a philosophy, it's an educational system that all students, regardless of labels, and labels here refer to gender, nationality, ethnicity, skin tone, skin color, language, etc., should be members of the general education community. It's one education community, it's a general community. The philosophy of inclusion encourages the elimination of the dual special versus general education. So in the past, like 10 years ago, we had general education systems. It's like mainstream system for education, and we have the special education system. And we isolated students with the special educational needs from the general education system. So we have 2 types of schools. Schools for general education systems, general schools, general education, and schools for special education, which serve the students with special educational needs. We're moving from this model, we're eliminating this discrimination, this dual system, and we're moving towards the creation of a merged system, one system that contains all, that embraces all students. And of course, it should be responsive to all the needs of all students. So why inclusion is important? Why do you want to promote for inclusive classrooms? Why do we want to promote for the inclusive values? Because inclusive classrooms give equal access to all children to education. Because the focus in this educational system is on what the child can do rather than what the child cannot do. It's the ability, not the disability. Because this inclusive learning environment make the children more accepting and understanding of one another's abilities, talents, personalities, and needs. Because it helps them build meaningful relationships and the friendships. Because it develops their confidence, because they have to interact with people or students from different walks of life. Because also it requires highly trained teachers and skilled teachers, because if you're teaching inclusive class, or if you want to make your class inclusive, you need to develop certain set of skills to address, to make your curriculum student-centered, to make your teaching student-centered, to apply differentiative teaching activities, and so on. Now, we're joined today by our colleague Asil, who is a teacher, educator, and the community of practice leader in Egypt. She met her group of teachers and they talked about inclusion and inclusive classroom. Asil, what do you have to say to us today?
Hi, Hala. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you. So I asked the teachers, how can you make sure that students from different backgrounds and different abilities all feel welcome in English class? One of the teachers said, by students' reaction, if they feel happy, enjoy, that means they're enjoying and they feel that they are welcomed in the class with activities and participation. Also, first day of class is always important, and that's why we do the icebreaker activities like, for example, find someone who. It's very important for students to know each other, to get to know each other about their different cultures, so that they can share respect, to know that everyone comes from a different background and that they are here to learn English and work together. Of course, more group work or pair work, and it's preferably where students get to mingle, so that means they can meet more. I mean, they don't only stick to a certain partner, they always change their partners, get to know each other. It is also important with teachers to learn about their cultures and their disabilities, so that the teacher can know how that she can include them or he can include them in the activities, so they don't feel that they're being left behind or the teacher is not giving them enough attention. So the teacher plays an important role to make sure that the students are included. She understands their cultural background, she understands their disabilities, and find activities that matches their needs. And of course, the choice of content can be very important, where students get to feel that they're welcome, where the teachers addressing things that are related to their interests. And finally, supporting and encouraging them all the time. That will help the students or learners to feel that they are welcomed in the classroom, and give them enough time and space to practice and feel that they are safe in the classroom, and they're being appreciated and supported by the teacher all the time.
Thanks, Asil, and I'm glad that a lot of what your group of teachers said on inclusion really resonates with what we're going to say in today's webinar. So thank you very much for your input.
Thank you.
We're moving on now to the next slide. I'd like just to highlight that using inclusive practices is one of the 12 professional practices that form the British Council CPD framework for teachers. I think many of you are quite used to this wheel of professional practices and quite used to the British Council CPD framework for teachers. We're focusing today on using inclusive practice as one of the 12 professional practices that lead to quality in the classroom. So using inclusive practices, the British Council Professional Practice for CPD, what does it involve? It involves the teachers recognizing and valuing diversity in learners. In areas such as language, you have learners who speak different languages or different dialects, backgrounds, they even have different cognitive and academic ability. You know that very well. They have physical capability, different physical capability or disability, and they come from different social backgrounds. Also, other important areas of diversity that you need to celebrate, recognize, and value are gender, race, and ethnicity, religion, and belief. Also, this diversity should be backed up and boosted by adopting specific pedagogical strategies that encourage inclusive education and support the learners in identifying, addressing, and assessing realistic individual learning goals. Let's start by an honest conversation and let's all assess our own teaching practices and really see if our teaching is really inclusive. So this is a breakdown of the inclusive practice, the inclusive professional practice, one of the 12 professional practices. This is a breakdown of what it really involves, and this is a rating of 5 stars. So I want you now to assess your own teaching practice and see if your teaching is really inclusive. So element number 1 is recognizing and valuing diversity. How many stars would you give yourself here? 1 or 5? 1 means the lowest and the 5 stars means the highest. 2, developing positive attitudes towards diversity in my learners. 3, using pedagogical strategies that encourage inclusive education within a supportive learning environment. 4, involving parents, learners, and other relevant individuals in creating an inclusive learning environment. 5, assessing individual learners in a variety of ways. 6, supporting learners in identifying, addressing, and assessing learning goals based on reasonable adjustment. Perhaps we don't have much time for this, but you can take a picture of this self-assessment tool. Take a picture with your mobile phone and think about your teaching practices and how far they are inclusive. I think this is a very important step for you to determine on how or where you're standing on the inclusivity spectrum. Now, what are the barriers to inclusion? Andrew, before we move on, do we have any interesting comments, any interesting responses in the Q&A box?
Yeah, we've had quite a few interesting things. So Samir Mohammed says, how can I apply inclusive teaching with different students' levels in learning? So that's a interesting, problem that teachers frequently raise about. Personally, I have never come across a class where students have the same level of learning, really, and maybe sometimes better at some things and others are better at others. Yeah,
exactly. This is why people are naturally different, right? People are naturally diverse. I never had a class with students at exactly the same level or students who understand information exactly the same way, or students who process information and respond to questions exactly the same time, the same way. That never happened, but it's a very valid question, really. And we're going to give at the end of the webinar tips and tricks and teaching strategies on how to make your teaching as inclusive as possible. So what are the barriers to inclusion? So there are barriers related to language and literacy. So be mindful when you teach the class that some of your students may come from a minority language community, right? Or they might have low literacy level, like the question we just had. So these groups are at risk of being excluded because they might not have the language or literacy skill to understand information or to access information. One example of excluding students because of language and literacy is in countries or education systems where English is used as the medium of instruction, or EMI, when everything is taught at the university or at the school through the medium of English, and English is not their home language. So this requirement, this restriction in the educational system might even exclude students from accessing materials or learning materials. And it's really increased, this exclusion a bit is increased if the parents even do not speak English, so they can't support their kids at home learning English. Also gender, because in some families believe that education is not important or has less value than other work or responsibilities for girls and young women. They think that girls and young women should work as carers to the family rather than spending their time in schools or in education. And also, girls as well as boys in some communities, in some parts of the world, are encouraged to work outside the house instead of continuing their education. And in some cases, if you're teaching using technology, or if you're still teaching in a blended way or teaching online, some families, some cases, give male family members, the male students, more opportunities to use digital devices than the female family members. So the boy has the right to use the mobile phone more than the girl. Be mindful of this when you design your teaching and your lessons. Another barrier is the different educational needs. We just talked with Andrew about how people are different and how people learn differently. So physically disabled students will definitely need, perhaps in some cases, expensive hardware devices to take part in online or remote lessons, right? So be mindful of this. Also, students with other needs might require constant support and supervision from an adult at home, and the parents might not be able to provide this. So be careful while using technology, because using technology can in some cases do harm to the students and exclude some learners, some groups of learners from accessing learning materials. Another barrier that the teachers need to take into account is the socioeconomic and the geographic exclusion. So some students come from families with a lot of money and resources, and they have the hardware and the internet connections to support remote learning. However, some families will not have the same access to the resources they need, right? So again, using technology can, especially large families with the children who each need an individual device to access their lessons or check their books or check their curriculum. And especially people who live in refugee settlements, refugee camps, rural areas, or poor communities, those guys might be disadvantaged even more and excluded if you use specific types of technologies. I'd like you now to do an activity. It's a matching activity. I'll give you 7 areas of diversity. The next slide, I'll give you 9 different situations. I want you to match the situation to the area of diversity. To do this, because I'm going to move from this slide, I want you to take a picture with your mobile phone to this slide, the slide we're looking at now, before I move to the next slide where we can find the situations. So what are the areas of diversity I want you to match? Problems with hearing, visual processing difficulties, dyslexia, race and ethnicity, religion and beliefs, social, emotional, or cognitive differences, and gender. Please take a screenshot or a picture with your mobile phone to this slide. And by the way, for the situations I'm going to show you now in a minute, we can use more than one example of diversity areas. All right, so you can give more than one correct answer for each situation. I'll take a picture myself because I'm going to move away from this slide. Right. Situation 1. A student, when he writes, he uses the right letters, but they are upside down or in the wrong order. He doesn't always understand the meaning of spoken language. He gets confused by the order of instructions. Which diversity area this is, you think? Any answers, Andrew?
Let me check the Q&A. Not in the Q&A, but maybe it's in the chat. Okay. Oh, we've got a lot of interesting comments.
Wow. Okay.
Some people's. No, sorry. Maybe the answers are still coming through.
Right. I think, and let me know what you think also, Andrew and Noura. I think in this situation when the learner writes.
A3, sorry, we've got one answer. A3. Yeah. And then
Dyslexia. Well, by A3 they mean dyslexia, because dyslexia
many
is
people.
number 1. Yeah, I see. Yeah, it could be dyslexia because they write the letters upside down, but also it could be, I think it could
somebody
be
said visual
processing difficulties. It could be. Yeah, it could be. Right.
Also a problem with hearing. Abdel Latif.
Yeah.
Rock.
Yeah, it could be all of these possibilities. Yeah. So next situation is some learners can't understand when it is noisy or there are several people in a conversation. That should be which area of diversity? Any responses, Andrew?
I think they're still about the last one, saying dyslexia. Hasna says 1.
Yeah, exactly. 1 is a correct answer because it refers to problems with hearing. Okay, situation C. A learner finds it difficult to focus on a whole text. She finds too much information on a page distracting. This should be
I think dyslexia again, if that's.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, and moment.
I would also say it's number 6, social, emotional, or cognitive differences, maybe. It's
yeah,
something about her cognitive abilities.
Maybe they're coming through in the chat a bit slow because many people are answering, and I'm sorry that I can't mention all your names. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Situation D, you notice that when you ask your learners questions, the boys answer most of them. The girls don't volunteer answers. So that is... Do you have any 7s, Andrew?
I think we've got a 6, but that could have been from the last question.
That's last question, yeah.
Yeah. So that's Ahmed answering the last question. I think maybe our chat takes a while. Gender, somebody said.
Yeah, it's gender. That's correct. It's gender, definitely.
Yeah, Noha says gender. Afreen says gender. Abdul Latif and Zainab.
Cool, great, well done. One more, some learners are very hungry because they are fasting in Ramadan. They can't eat during daylight. They have to do an English grammar assessment, but can't concentrate on learning. What's that? I think they take time to look at the slide, the previous slide, then come to the Q&A box and put their answers. Perhaps this is...
Sabrine says 5. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, that's correct,
yeah.
Sabrine. That's correct. Well done. It's a religion and beliefs. That's correct. Perhaps one more. A learner sees that all the images of people in the course book have a different skin color to him. Right? So I feel like this book doesn't speak to me. People in the book, the characters in the book do not look like me. So what's the area of diversity here? Any responses, Andrew, you think?
Wafa says 6 and Lina Sami Aid 5. But there's there's many coming in. Okay, Nuha, race, Lamis 4. Somebody says ethnic, which
Yeah, well done, Noha and Lamis. It's 4, race and ethnicity. Well done. Good. I think you get, I think you got the point now of the different areas of diversity. Now, how do we make our teaching inclusive? How do we make our classes inclusive? This is a very famous picture. I'm sure you've seen it so many times before. The bird, the monkey, the seagull, the dog, the elephant, and the fish are being asked to do one task. Everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. So that guy is asking these different animals, the dog, the seagull, the fish, the elephant, the bird, the monkey, to take the same exam, and the exam is to climb that tree. But the animals said, obviously, that no one size fits all, or one size cannot fit all, or one size doesn't really fit all. So that's not a valid question to ask. That's not a fair opportunity. So first strategy is to understand your students. Have what we call a clear learner profile. Who are your students? What are their special learning needs? What are their life challenges? Know them well, understand their needs well, and you can contact students or parents or caregivers to identify any potential barriers to their learning, or if they need any additional support needs. This is the most important starting point. Then another strategy is to differentiate your teaching. And this means that all learners work towards the same learning outcome, but they have choices. They can respond differently to the same task. They can achieve the same learning outcome through different pathways, through different tools. This includes level, resources, and the way they do the activity. They can do the activity at different levels of difficulty. They can use different resources to fulfill the task. They can do the task through different ways. One example is to give options for them about new topics or language points. So suppose they need to learn a new piece of grammar. To learn this grammar point, they can watch a video, they can work through a problem with a partner, or they can just read about it alone. Another example is a choice board. Give them a grid divided into 9 squares, 3 by 3. And the 9 squares have 9 options learners can choose from. These options can be different responses to the task. They can either respond to the task through drawing, writing, moving, solving problems, working alone, working together, just to give them choices. And I have an interesting example here of a choice board. So you can see it says my choice board. So I have a choice, right? I am in control of my own learning. So I can choose to write, I can choose to match, I can play a puzzle, I can sort shapes, I can build a tower, I can write a letter, I can play with flashcards, and so on. Another example of choice board is the project choice board. I can fulfill the task by presenting a TED Talk, by making an animated movie, by building a model, by drawing a poster, by designing PowerPoint presentation, by writing a short children's story or small children's book. And if you're a teacher educator or a COP leader or a tag facilitator, you can even use the choice board to make your training inclusive, not only your teaching. So you can ask the teachers to choose any of these online tools: word wall, book widgets, Wakelet, Flipify, Powtoon, Flipgrid, UTeach, Word Clouds, and each online tool serves a different purpose. It's either for designing assessment tasks, for creating content, for managing class and students' behavior, for collaboration amongst other fellow teachers. You can also think about the accessibility of the materials and the resources you create. So you create fantastic materials, but are these accessible for all of your learners? So think about learners with visual or hearing impairments. How can you help them? Here are some ideas. Avoid images of text that cannot be copied into a dictionary or a translator or a screen reader. So sometimes teachers take a screenshot of a text and use it on a slide as a text, but it's not a text, it's an image. So students with visual impairments cannot take the image and put it on a screen reader because it's not a text, so the screen reader is not going to read it. Avoid that. Use of colored text helps some people. The color coding, you know, it's a good and interesting teaching technique, but also it can hinder others from learning because some students cannot differentiate and recognize different colors. When you explain something, use audio and the text together because this will help students with different impairments, visual or hearing. When you explain something verbally, you say it, you explain it verbally, back this up with a picture. So describe verbally, and this is a picture of what I'm talking about. Whenever you speak on video, turn on the captions. Whenever you put pictures on the screen, use the alt text. It's an option automatically comes with PowerPoint presentation. Alt text is a brief text that describes the picture for those who can't see it, for those who are visually impaired. Use sans serif fonts, that's a specific font on your computer, and use 12 PT as the font size. Capitalize hashtags, so when you use hashtags, start capital letters of each word to make it more readable. Avoid text boxes in Microsoft Word documents because screen readers cannot read them. Avoid using images of text, I covered that already. Use 70% difference in contrast and a font size of 12 PT. Use clear formatted headings and lists to help students navigate your document well. Now, I'll show you a list of classroom activities and ideas, and you tell me where on the spectrum of inclusivity these ideas can be. Are they most inclusive? Are they least inclusive? Or are they inclusive enough? All right, most inclusive, inclusive, least inclusive. When you give learners a choice of tasks. Andrew, Noura, what do you think? I'll start with you. What do you think? Is this most inclusive, just inclusive, least inclusive?
Sorry, were you asking me then?
You or Noura, yes. Asking
All
you.
right.
It's a test for you.
Sure. I mean, give learners a choice of tasks. Well, yeah, if they're within the learners' abilities, giving a choice sounds interesting. I think it's something that you need to maybe explain to the learners, because sometimes people become confused when they have a choice for the first time. Yeah.
So would you call this activity as most inclusive, inclusive, or least inclusive, or somewhere in between?
I'd say it was inclusive to most inclusive. Yeah.
Yeah. I would put it in the same direction.
Yeah,
as well.
I agree with Andrew. Inclusive to least inclusive. Yeah.
And what about this one? Give learners a choice of ways to express themselves to achieve the learning outcome. So they can draw, they can write a comic, they can write a story, they can audio record a story. Where do you put it on the spectrum?
Inclusive, especially if we put the students in groups of different abilities. Each one of them can have a role according to their strengths or weaknesses.
Yeah, that's right, Noura. I would also put it somewhere between inclusive and the most inclusive because it's the same learning outcome, but I'm giving you a variety of ways how to achieve this learning outcome. About this one, groups compete against each other to win. So you are the winners if you get the most points, or if you answer first. Most inclusive, inclusive, least inclusive.
I think this is interesting. I mean, I think the teacher needs to know their learners, and learners can find competition fun. Wafa had an interesting point that classroom learning, as well as being inclusive, should be fun, that she made in the chat before. So yeah, if you can have competition and learners find it fun and it doesn't discourage people, then yeah, it's useful, I think.
Yeah,
but this is, to me, it's least inclusive.
Yes, Noura, that's
because
right.
Those who are good achievers will compete while the rest will be feeling left out.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, because competition is not for everyone, right? Because the winners, the people who will answer fast will win. People who answer later will be disappointed. So I don't think this is inclusive. I think this is a little bit towards least inclusive. It's fun for some people, but it's not fun for everybody, right? Teams work together towards a common goal. For example, find different ways to group a set of words. Shall we say inclusive? Inclusive enough?
I think it is inclusive and most inclusive because we are using different people, different skills, different levels. Because they are
but it's inclusive. Yeah, I would put it in between inclusive and least inclusive, though, because it's one goal. Group of learners work together, but it's only one way to achieve the task, right?
Well, it looks like there's a kind of potential for diverse ways to understand what the task is. If the learners can group the words according to their categories. So if the teacher or whoever's giving feedback is also open to that, maybe that's fairly inclusive.
Right, yes.
So, I mean, it could be like things I like, things I don't like, or it could be fruit and vegetables, you know, if it's vocabulary.
There is a space, there is a space for teacher to diversify the task a little bit, You're right, Andrew.
There is a nice debate in the chat box between participants. We have
Tell me about it.
Comments about most inclusive, some think it's inclusive or least inclusive. So I think it depends on their own teaching experience.
Yeah, it depends on the teaching experience. It depends on how you understand the situation. For example, this one we're looking at number D. Andrew said it looks like inclusive / least inclusive, but there is still space. There is still room for the teachers to diversify the ways to.
Yeah, I mean, Sabrine has an interesting point as well, because, you know, like when you talk about group work or competition or whatever, I think it, you know, just depends how the students work. If they are in a group or a team, and so Sabrine's point is it's inclusive if there's cooperation. So I think that's kind of key, isn't it? And it's about creating, you know, it's somebody else. I think, that Fatima from Jordan said, inclusive practice is important to make positive harmony between students. So if the teacher can create or encourage students to encourage to cooperate on tasks, then that's the difference between a task being difficult and discouraging or inclusive, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah, it's very interesting what you're saying, Andrew, and the very insightful ideas we're getting from the teachers today. Really, thank you very much. So I think you got the point now of the spectrum of inclusivity. It depends where you put the classroom activity. It depends on your experience, level of experience, again, the dynamics between the students, the level of difficulty, depends on so many things, but I think you got the idea. I'm moving now to tips and strategies for making your classrooms and learning environment inclusive as possible as we can. First, creating a sense of belonging, and this could be through introductory videos or live introductory discussions. Tell them about yourself, and they love to know personal stuff about their teachers, and encourage them also. You start by yourself, encourage them to share personal stuff about their lives. Also, foster a culture of growth and the growth mindset, and make it very clear to everybody that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to be weak. We don't have to be strong all the time, we don't have to be right all the time, we don't have to be top achievers all the time. It's a space for learning and growth. First day survey, again, this is something that we touched upon earlier in the webinar. Getting a clear picture of your learner's profile by surveying them and surveying their parents to understand them and their needs better. So using icebreakers would create a sense of belonging, and having a consistent and regular way of communication between you and the students and the parents also help creating this sense of belonging. One simple but effective thing is to pronounce your student's name correctly and remember them. They love it. It creates a very strong sense of community. They believe they are part, they feel they're a part of a bigger community. When it comes to syllabus and the course content, it's really important when you design your course calendar and set dates for presentations, exams, and projects to look at the Interfaith calendar website, just to be aware of the different religious dates and the celebrations. Students, because of self-esteem issues, might prefer to take an exam to take a religious holiday, so be mindful of that. Also, the tone of the language you're using in writing your syllabus and course content, try to adopt a relaxed, warm, conversational tone. Also, the characters in the textbooks and the resources and the media you choose and the materials you create should reflect diverse people, diverse skin color, diverse voices, diverse perspective. When it comes to teaching strategies, avoid using these statements. I know you use them perhaps unconsciously, but avoid saying things like, as you all know, it's very easy to see, or the answer is very obvious. I think these statements could alienate the students who don't know the answer and discourage them from continuing to learn. Also, do not assume that all students understand what you're saying. Always check for understanding. And one good technique for checking understanding is using CCQs or concept check questions. And there are different techniques of making these questions. You can have a yes/no question like, does X means this? So the answer is simple, yes, no. Discrimination questions like, does X refer to or to and the answer is a choice of 2. Or use visuals, which graph corresponds to X. So they would say this picture corresponds to this concept, and so on. So always check understanding and never assume them. Activate their prior knowledge, because when you link what you're saying to their prior knowledge, it brings a lot of strength to the topic you're teaching. Personalize content, personalize your course materials, because this way students feel more connected and more engaged. And again, one simple but effective thing is adding a little bit of humor. Students like to laugh because people like to laugh. People in general like to be happy, and they like, by default, they like funny people. They like cheerful people. They feel you are more approachable, you are friendly. Give them some thinking time for equal participation and equal opportunities. Give them some thinking time. So throw in the question, stop, give them some time to reflect. Allow them to gather and formulate their thoughts before answering the questions. Also, it's useful to share discussion questions with them beforehand so they have time to think about the questions and come prepared. And there is a fantastic, simple activity called talking chips. It teaches the students to take turns to discuss and talk. So it prevents one student from dominating the discussion or something. So that the talking chips are setting students in circles, having chips or cards or pieces of paper on the table. So each student take a chip or a card in turns. The card allows them to speak about something. The card could be of certain color, which means specific something to say, or the color might have a cue or a prompt. The students respond to, like a question they respond to, or it could be anything. The cards could be blank, but it just gives them time to organize themselves and talk in turns. Assessment, be transparent, give them all the information around an exam, the question types, the time of the exam, the purpose of the exam, and so on. Use rubrics and make them know or aware of the rubrics. They need to know the criteria of their evaluation, on what basis they will be evaluated, and give the students frequent and regular feedback, but also allow students to give you feedback on the course climate, on the learning environment, on your ways of teaching. This way, they will feel their voice is heard and their opinion is valued. So today we covered this point. We talked about what we mean by inclusion, the importance of inclusion in the classroom. We self-assessed our teaching practices from an inclusion lens. We talked about barriers that can hinder us from creating inclusive classrooms, and we ended the webinar with some tips and strategies to make your teaching inclusive. I'll leave you with some useful resources for today. Check out the British Council Teaching English website, which Andrew mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar. There is a series of articles about inclusive practices. There is also an interesting article about the inclusive teacher checklist. I know you like checklists because I like checklists. There is also a podcast, episode 3, on how I can ensure my teaching inclusive. I love podcasts, and the British Council is producing really interesting, really engaging podcasts. And finally, check out the self-study booklet on using inclusive practices if you'd like to have a deep dive in this topic. Thank you very much. That's all from me today. I don't know if Andrew and Noura has got any comments or anything to add.
Thank you very much, Hala, and thank you all for joining. Just to remind everybody to do the survey, I have just posted the link so that you get the certificate in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Hala and Noura. Just a little idea, if you find that you're asking maybe some students to give you an answer too often and other students would like to, maybe you could write their name on a card and have all the students' names in a jar. And maybe you could have one colour for boys and another colour for girls. If you find that you're asking one gender questions more than another. And then when you've asked that person a question or asked them to do something, you could put it down so it doesn't go back in the jar and you're asking somebody else the next time. Obviously, if you think that child might be, or that learner might be a bit embarrassed by the question, you don't have to ask them. Yeah, okay, just a little hint, but I know that Hala has many ideas that she's already presented. Tell us what works in your classroom. Yeah, look forward to your ideas. I think that's all for today, is it? Hala?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, thanks for all your comments, and I'm really sorry that we couldn't mention everybody. They were coming so thick and fast. And thanks for joining from Jordan, Libya, Algeria, Lebanon, various parts of the Gulf. So hope to see you all again on AskHala in the future. And please do check out what you can find on teachingenglish.org.uk. So,
Bye bye, everybody. Have a nice weekend. Bye bye.